Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing okay. I hope your October isn't too cold yet. My name is Emily and today we're doing sort of a recently read September / mid-October wrap-up. You might have noticed that I didn't come out with a September wrap-up, and that is because my September was an impressive fail reading-wise. Like, I saw people's wrap-ups like, I read 11 books, I read 17 books, I read 3 books. Like, that is just how it goes sometimes. I was halfway through a couple other books at the end of the month, but just finishing them didn't happen. I don't know why, but September is always a really slumpy month for me. There's changes going on, weather changes. I'm always involved with a couple other things. And also in particular, in the last 2 weeks of September, I was working on my Midsommar video, which should be up by now. If you haven't seen it, I will link it. That video just ate an impressive amount of my time, just the reading, the researching, and the watching of films, and the writing of the script, and then the editing. It just took up so much of my time. I really didn't anticipate how big of a labor it would be. And I'm very proud of the video, of course. I really like how it came out, but all that came at a cost. I don't think I've put that much work into a video before, not even my Little Women video, I don't think. So anyway, today we are going to talk about 7 books I have read between the beginning of September to mid-October. I know a lot of people would have read, what, like 30 books in that period of time, but sometimes that is just how the cards fall. But anyway, let's get right to it. Let's talk about some books. The first book, or really books, I want to talk about, it's the Star Wars prequel trilogy novelizations. I had heard some great things about these novelizations, and of course I love the Star Wars prequel films, no apologies. So I set out to read the novelizations. I thought it could add a lot of layers to the films for me and allow me to be in the heads of my favorite characters. And they did not disappoint, so let's talk through them one by one. So the first one, of course, was the Phantom Menace, which was written by Terry Brooks. So if you've seen the films, you know it's surrounding the Trade Federation's invasion of Naboo, all the events surrounding that, Queen Amidala and her handling of that, the Jedi intervention, and of course the discovery of Anakin Skywalker. Basically, Terry Brooks made this very much a book about Anakin, which is not a bad idea. This trilogy is really about him. He added in a lot of scenes around Anakin before the start of the film, around his pod race preceding the one which he wins in the film. And this was actually really interesting because Terry Brooks makes it very evident that Anakin is prescient. He always has a sense of anticipating things before they happen. He kind of goes into a daze, almost a trance sometimes, and he will kind of say what he says, or he'll act according to what he sees. And it's a great setup for later on in the books when he has these prescient dreams or visions and he acts according to them, and sometimes things go okay and sometimes things go really, really wrong. And in particular with his relationship with Padme, the way the novelization is written, basically Anakin anticipates or foresees that he will marry Padme. So basically when he meets Padme, he has this premonition that they will get married, which is correct. Some people might find that weird, but for me, I didn't think it was particularly creepy or anything. It's just that this was a kid who's prescient and he's just foreseeing these things. Like in the Dune series, kids have these sorts of visions about being adults or having adult experiences all the time. So I don't think we should really fault a Star Wars novelization for including something like that. Like, these films are rammed all the time by critics for having this romance between these two people who are 5 years apart. Like, you know, Anakin is 10, Padme is like 14, and people just criticize the fact that they engage in a romance later on, and I'm just like, well, they are consenting adults when they are in a relationship, so I don't get what's wrong or creepy about that. Like, it happens in these critically acclaimed book series like Dune, so I don't know why people have to pile on the prequels for this particular reason. But anyway, back to the novel. I thought this was a very interesting take on Anakin's relationship with Padme because it almost implies that he loves her almost because he has this premonition about her. Like, overall, I'm okay with it, but I also would like to think Anakin falls in love with Padme for his own reasons as well, because he does admire her, not just because he knew that they would be married and therefore he loves her. It doesn't give him the kind of agency that I envision him having. So anyway, those were some thoughts I had. So overall, I would say I was okay with this book. Like, I thought it was decently written, added just enough additional material to the film so that it could add some layers to the characters. But I don't think I enjoyed this as much as the other two books, because The Phantom Menace really is not my favorite prequel film. So inevitably, I wasn't going to enjoy the story as much. One big criticism I do have of this book is that we are pretty much never in Padme or Queen Amidala's heads. I don't know why I refer to them as two separate people, because they are the same person. That is the twist near the beginning of the big Naboo battle. So I think Terry Brooks wanted us to have the big surprise reveal that Padme is actually Queen Amidala, because I guess that was a nice reveal near the end of Phantom Menace. But I actually think he should have let us be in on that secret the whole time, us as the audience, because it would be so rewarding for us to be inside Padme's head. It is just a huge missed opportunity for us to know how Padme is thinking the whole time, know what she's thinking as she receives news from her home planet, and as she is looking out at these politicians when she has to confront them, and what she thinks of Tatooine when she is walking around there with Qui-Gon and meeting Anakin. When we don't get to see what's going on inside Padme, or really the Queen's head, we don't get an idea of how she thinks, we don't get to appreciate how smart she is. And we can see it in the last bit of the novel when we can finally be in her head that she's actually quite creative and very good at improvising in a battle during a crisis. And it's a real shame we weren't able to see a lot of that intelligence and power in play, because really Phantom Menace is where we get to see her at her most powerful. Like, she is a queen, she is a sovereign. And she is a character who becomes more and more vulnerable over the next two films, and I think it would just be really great to see her in that state of power at that time. So that was Phantom Menace, and moving on to Attack of the Clones. In terms of pure enjoyment, I enjoyed Attack of the Clones the best, because this book is peak Amidala. Like, every time there was an Amidala moment in Attack of the Clones, I just had to resist the urge to just highlight the entire passage or the entire page. I love Anakin and Padme's interactions in this book. Like, I didn't think their romance was terrible actually in Attack of the Clones. It's one of my favorite parts, but I really loved how R.A. Salvatore, the writer, expanded on those moments and that dialogue. And I just love how Anakin is written. Like, he's written with so much fire imagery. Like, I think every writer intuitively uses fire imagery when talking about Anakin, because he is a fire being. He is an archetype of a fiery personality. Like, I think if Anakin were a tarot card, he would be the Knight of Wands. He is the quintessential Knight of Wands. Like, he is pure passion and instinct, and I love it. I think there's this one scene where Anakin goes to Padme's door and she opens it for him, and like, I think the sun is coming up behind him. So for a moment, he seems to be sort of crowned in the sunlight. It's like he has this halo around his head, and she's like taken aback by the sight of him basically haloed in sunlight, and it was beautiful. And I love how Obi-Wan is written in contrast to Anakin, because Anakin is like pure passion and energy and motion, but Obi-Wan is more of a space brain, and he's concerned with these intellectual matters. Like, I think in the elevator scene when he and Anakin are just going to meet Padme Amidala, and Obi-Wan is considering the phenomenon of sunlight and sunset, whereas Anakin is just completely in the moment and present, and he's just full of untapped energy. Like, Obi-Wan really is a space brain. He's really like air in this book. He's really intellectual and seeking knowledge, and in the middle of this big investigation. I also love that in this book we got to see what an idealist Padme is. There's this scene where where she and Anakin have been captured by the Geonosians, and they're pretty much facing death if Padme doesn't join with the Separatists. But then she also realizes that she can't give up on any of her ideals ever, even if it means saving the person she loves and saving herself. And that's how much of an idealist she is. That's how much she believes in her life's work. So it was really interesting to see how her political idealism plays out in this really long, drawn-out conflict. So now we get to Revenge of the Sith, written by Matthew Stover. And oh man, this was a real bruiser to read. So Revenge of the Sith is my favorite Star Wars film, so of course I had some high expectations. And this was really interesting because I think Matthew Stover was the least faithful to the film and the film dialogue when he was writing this. He totally rewrites certain scenes from the films. He completely leaves out some of the iconic dialogue from the film, which was a choice. So I think it was hard for me to get out of that mindset of the film when I was reading this. I was like, okay, this is a novel. He's going to write it in a way that fits a book, you know, not just someone who just wants a carbon copy of the film. So it worked, but I still wish he'd left some of those amazing lines in. I think another sort of small criticism I have is that the first 20% or so of the book is kind of slow. I think like the first 20 to 25% of the book is devoted to that confrontation, that battle on Coruscant. And why it's slow is that Matthew Stover is kind of writing these introductions to each of the characters, getting us into each character's shoes. So basically for each main character in that confrontation, he'll be like, this is what it's like to be Anakin Skywalker. He's going through this. He is skilled because of this, but he has these flaws. So basically the first 20-25% of the book is that. So I did like those character introductions, but I still think it dragged on the pacing a little bit. But nonetheless, I still really enjoyed the book. Of course, there were some great Amidala moments. And of course, this is the beginning of the rupture of Anakin and Padme's relationship, which is really heartbreaking, really upsetting. Another thing I would have liked in the book would be if the battle between Anakin and Obi-Wan was a bit longer and more drawn out, because the way it's written in the book, it's like it just happens like that. Because it's such an important battle. It's so emotionally charged. It's these two people who've been such close friends who are now being torn apart, and it's really, really sad. So I wish that there had been more time devoted to that final battle rather than the beginning battle of Coruscant. But of course, those criticisms that I had were compensated by a lot of amazing stuff in the book. So all in all, I gave Phantom Menace 3.5 stars. I gave Attack of the Clones 5 stars. And Revenge of the Sith 4.5 stars. Moving on to another book with prescient characters, I read Children of Dune by Frank Herbert. This is the third book in the Dune series. So Danica, or Comic Book Girl 19, she was doing a book club on Twitch every week, so I read up to the point that she had just reached, and I got to follow along with her for the rest of the book club, which was great. So this book follows the children of Paul Atreides, Leto II, and Ganima. So they're both coming into their power, but there's also a lot of political schemes happening around them that could threaten them. Meanwhile, we have Aliyah, who is Paul's sister, who was pre-born in the womb, so she was born with all of the memories of her ancestors, basically. So she is suffering a lot of psychic pain from that experience, and that has disastrous results. So as always, Frank Herbert is a really beautiful writer. I really love his prose. I will say in this read, I have started to discover more things that frustrate me about Frank Herbert's writing. For instance, he's not very good at describing things. Like, if you thought George R.R. Martin and Tolkien over-described things, Frank Herbert under-describes things. He'll just throw a thing in there and be like, oh, just imagine it for yourself. And it's like, well, no, you need to describe it somehow. He does that with everything, like clothing or rituals or buildings that people inhabit. Sometimes he'll throw in concepts for us, like, you know, a religious concept that people believe in, and just leaves it to our imagination. And I'm just like, wait, you you threw in a very crucial concept for us to understand, but then you didn't really describe it. I would say his writing is very, very dense as well, because people like talk about these really high-level philosophical concepts, and a lot of times I had to pause my audiobook and go to my Kindle edition and just read things over and over just to understand what people were talking about, because these are people basically achieving a godhood level of consciousness. But other than that, I did enjoy this book. Plot-wise, I enjoyed it. There's a lot of tension in this book, so many schemes, so many plans within plans. And I enjoyed the characters as well. I really enjoyed the twins Leto and Ganima. Like, they really freak people out so much because they're also pre-born, so they're basically adults who've lived many lives inside these little 9-year-old bodies. I enjoyed Faradin, who's a new character who's introduced in this book, and I enjoyed his relationship with Lady Jessica, who is back in this book. So I'm still enjoying this series. I am psyched for God Emperor of Dune because I know some weird shit goes down in that book. So 4 stars for Children of Dune. And next up, I read The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson, which is of course the 3rd book in the Mistborn trilogy. I had made it a goal of mine to finish the Mistborn trilogy by the end of this year, and I did it. I have no idea what's going along with Cosmere Along, or if there's more of that Brandon Sanderson read-along stuff going on. I'm not sure. I'm just following my own rules now. This book is an interesting case. I have kind of conflicted feelings about it because on the one hand, I like the many philosophical concepts and ideas that are discussed in this book. On the other hand, I feel like Brandon Sanderson gets so caught up in all that stuff sometimes that it hampers the rest of the book. It kind of slows down a lot of the pacing. And those ideas are very interesting and important to the ending of this series, but he gets caught in these quagmires, and sometimes it's like, look, can we get back to the plot of this book, please? And the more I read Brandon Sanderson, the more I'm pretty convinced he was influenced by Dune. Like, there are substances that enhance your abilities that people are fighting over. You have people bred specially for their abilities. And you also have the deification of mere humans, which is also a big idea in the Dune series. Part of me wonders if all these long drawn out discussions of religions and religious consistency and faith are kind of inspired by Dune as well, because Dune does a lot of that similar stuff. But overall, I enjoyed this trilogy. It was a solid 4-star trilogy for me. Not my favorite, of course. I still think Brandon Sanderson still has a lot of his early writing flaws in this series, like with his dialogue and exposition and so forth. But overall, it's a very solid world, a lot of really great characters. So this book got 4 stars for me, like both of the other books in this series. And I also hit my goal of reading City of Fallen Angels, which was one of the books on my TBR for this month. So this is the 4th book in the Mortal Instruments series by Cassie Clare. Like, the last 3 books of the Mortal Instruments are almost considered a trilogy of their own, and I can kind of see that because this book is basically setting up a lot of other stuff for the other 2 books. I've also heard kind of negative things about these last 3 books, which I can see why. The first 80 pages or so of this book dragged a lot for me. We spent so much time with Simon, and when we got to spend time with Clary and Jace, our main characters, it was just so much angst. And I get that this is the type of series this is, but sometimes the angst gets a bit repetitive after a while. Like, when have Clary and Jace not had angst in their relationship? Like, we've had this for like 3 books now, so I think I'm starting to get a bit tired of it. Every time they were together, they were both suffering from these inner agonies of being around each other for various reasons, and I'm just like, can we get to the plot, please? And eventually this book did get going, and I whizzed through it after that. We got a really big, elaborate mystery, which I was really engaged with. But overall, I feel like a lot of this book was really setting things up for future books. So I don't know how I feel about that. I didn't really love that aspect of the book. So I gave this book 3, maybe 3.5 stars. I liked it. but not the most impressive book from Cassie Clare's. And finally, we have A Secret History of Witches by Louisa Morgan. I had been really looking forward to reading this book because it had been on a lot of witchy book listicles I'd seen. It's a multi-generational story about a family of witches. And of course, I am a sucker for books about witches. So this book is about a family of Romani witches. They have escaped from France to England because of persecution in their home country. And they continue to face persecution, alienation from the people around them, and every generation we follow one female character as she falls in love, deals with her gifts, and passes her heritage on to the next generation. So some people found this book repetitive in that every generation seemed to go through very similar issues, and I can kind of see that because it seemed like every character had to grapple with finding out about their gift and then falling in love with somebody and then having a kid. But I also didn't mind because I think it's kind of talking about the cyclical nature of families and how some things progress but some things stay the same in each generation. I got especially interested in the middle of the book because the third main character in this novel is quite interesting in that she is a terrible person, but her story was actually different from the others, so it was interesting to watch her develop and also have her daughter deal with her being a terrible person. So I was really gripped with the story for the first, say, 75%. The last 25% kind of dragged for me. Basically, it's the last character we're dealing with, and she's participating in the Second World War. And I felt like Louisa Morgan was more expositioning to me about her and her story more than telling us her story. Like, I didn't think you could make a story with the Second World War boring, but apparently you can. So that was kind of a disappointing aspect of the book. Another thing I kind of took issue with was that this family is a family of Romani, right? So they do have their own tradition of witchcraft. But the type of witchcraft that they have, that Louisa Morgan gave them in the book, is very, very Wiccan, very, very contemporary paganism. Like, they celebrate the 8 Sabbats from the Wheel of the Year, you know, Samhain, Imbolc. So a lot of witchcraft and pagan traditions did celebrate a lot of similar holidays, like Yule and the harvest. But a lot of these other Sabbats, they're very unique to Celtic or Druidic traditions. So I would have understood the inclusion of these Sabbats if this family was of a British origin, like a Celtic or Druidic tradition. But they are Romani, and I'm pretty sure the Romani have their own tradition of witchcraft. So I kind of took issue with that because that means you're kind of projecting your own concept of witchcraft, your own conceptions of paganism onto another oppressed people without researching those people's traditions, which is kind of problematic. Like, I had a lot of conflicted feelings about this book. I might even post an individual review of this book because I have so many feelings. So initially I gave this book 4 stars. I might bump it down to 3.5 or even 3 because I really loved it for the first 75% or so, but the last bit really dragged for me. I found myself kind of zoning out, and I also kind of have an issue with projecting a lot of contemporary paganism onto a people that maybe you didn't bother to research. And the Romani are an oppressed and persecuted people, so I feel like we should do justice to them and their traditions rather than projecting our own notions onto them. I'll probably elaborate on these thoughts in a more well thought out way in my individual review, but anyway, those are my thoughts on that book. Really mixed feelings. So that's it for my September and mid-October wrap up. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I'm looking forward to talking to you again about books I've read at the end of this month. Let me know down below what books you have enjoyed recently. Like this video if you liked it, and also subscribe to my channel. You can follow me on Twitter and Goodreads and Instagram in the meantime, and I will see you in my next video.